Hi, everyone, and welcome to Breaking the Cycle Two Step Forward podcast with myself, Chris Tuck, and
Beverly Ann.
hi, everyone, and welcome to this special edition, number 2. And we are talking about the IICSA final concluding report that was published on the 20th of October 2022. And we are going to have quite a few of these sessions dedicated to the report, because it's very, very important from my perspective and your perspective.
Absolutely. And also when we get a report, it's quite overwhelming. In fact, it's very overwhelming. And sometimes the language can become complicated. And so we thought we'd break it down into segments to make it more manageable and also more understandable and relatable, because it's written in a language not for the everyday person, and that's not taking it away. But I know, I don't know about you, Chris, but I know sometimes I read it and think, can I have that in English at times?
Yeah, the first section of the report obviously was about the victim and survivor's voice, and that's very clear.
That is clear.
It is clear as clear can be, and it's quite triggering and it's quite traumatizing, but that's the reality of the situation. And if anything, a lot of the detail probably isn't there to the extent that it is people's reality. But saying that, it still is triggering and re-traumatizing, especially if you've been through some experiences like that before.
Absolutely. And I think for me, whilst we're not, we're very aware of what goes on and how big it is, but to see it all in one place within a report. And as was said in part 1, this is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
This is not only 6,000 people. This is 6,000 people whose voices were heard to represent all the hundreds of thousands behind them as well.
That are silenced.
Absolutely. And they haven't had their opportunity to speak.
And some people don't. Victim survivors go to their graves literally with their secrets.
And they don't share, and that's everybody's choice. So we just want to reiterate that, because for me, it was like, wow, these voices are being heard, but we also need to acknowledge those people that, for whatever reason, were unable to be heard as well.
Yeah.
But then when we come after that part, one of the things that we wanted to look at as well was we wanted to compare the reality of what trauma-informed reporting is like and the reality of what it is that we are looking to be heard and how it's being heard.
So we are going to compare, for example, the Truth Project, our experiences, and also our experiences going through the criminal justice system, i.e. disclosing to the police, and how that makes you feel, and what we needed to make our experience less triggering and less traumatizing.
Absolutely. And so that's why we want to share that, because we are real people, even though there's a professional perspective as well. And as you heard in part 1, Chris, you were very involved with the VSCP, weren't you?
I was. Currently still a member of the Victim and Survivors Consultative Panel, consultants to the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. Been there since inception for 7 years, and so have been an integral voice, really, along with my co-workers, my colleagues, along with the Victim Survivors Forum, and along with all of those individuals that took part in the actual investigations that the inquiry did. So it's really important that we do talk about our experiences so that people understand where we're coming from. And I just want to go back to the actual report for the moment. So part A was about the victim survivor's voice. And as you said, the second part was about the investigations, the conclusions, the recommendations. And some of that can be in quite hard speak. That is not everyday, understandable English for most of us. So we want to go in the future into that more deeply in our own words, so we can make it more relatable.
Yeah, and I think that's the word, relatable.
Yeah.
So that it's clear, concise, and it enables people to make choice on actions going forward and ensuring that implementation of this report is followed up.
Yeah, and that's really important, because once the inquiry closes down, there is no organisation to keep the government accountable. And as we said last time, our government at the moment is unstable. There is no one really champion the report that came out, and it's up to us, the staff members that worked within the inquiry that have gone on to other posts. It's up to the victim and survivors that took part and who haven't taken part to actually push this agenda forward and to keep the government accountable, because we don't want to be doing another inquiry.
No.
We don't want to be writing another report when we know what we know. And there is no sweeping that underneath the carpet anymore. We have to take action.
And as you can hear, it's something that we're both very passionate about. And Chris, as you explained in the first episode, you've been involved with it for 7 years now,
Yes.
isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
So can you talk us through, Chris, when the Truth Project was being set up and
Yeah.
you knew that you needed to find a venue to enable people to share their story? And as we know, this was often the first time many people had shared. I know that there were parts that I'd never shared before as well, personally. What was it that went through your mind that you wanted to implement? What was important?
So when it was brought to our attention that the inquiry in Australia were doing or had done this truth type session, we thought it would be really good, not us as civil servants, it was their idea, to bring in as many victim survivors' voices as possible so that we could build up the picture and almost get it evidenced. So even though it's not a legal gathering of evidence, it's more of a, what is this thing, child sexual abuse? How big is it? How deep does it go? What are the failings that we're all facing? And what are all of the issues around getting redress, getting justice, getting support, all of that kind of information? So to make it the pathway as safe for victim survivors as we could, we had to find locations that were not triggering. We had to set up the room, the environment, in a trauma-informed way. So it wasn't going to be clinical. It was going to be as homely as it could be. All of those little additions like cup of tea, biscuits, tissues, crowns, colouring books, 2 different seating areas, like table and chairs for those that wanted it, or more comfy chairs like this if people wanted it. So it was all about giving the victim and survivor that were coming forward to share their lived experience whatever they needed to make them feel calm, comfortable and safe as much as possible when it came to sharing their lived experience.
And that I completely understand, because for me, I always like to have natural lights and to be near the doorway so that I know that if it becomes too much, I can have an access to fresh air.
And that's what we tried to do as well, was to have like either a breakout room where they could go and sit by themselves, or with the counsellor that was there on the day, if that's what it was needed. And in some venues, we actually had like outdoor space, like a garden area or whatever we could try and get hold of. But because during the pilot phase of this, where we tested it, it needed to be in different areas. So we couldn't have locations that were fixed, that were known to people.
Yes.
It had to be, the location was kept secret. The address was only known to the victim survivors turning up.
Yes.
Because we were told quite clearly that if it literally said Truth Project, that people would feel judged even going to the venue.
Yeah.
We also had to make sure that, you know, it was a neutral kind of building, so it couldn't be a church, for example, or something that would be triggering for someone that's gone through abuse within a church. You can't ask someone that's been abused within a church to turn up to a church to give their lived experience. So a lot of planning went into these truth sessions.
Absolutely, and it's having an adult space that's independent, isn't it?
Yeah.
So just so that anyone who's aware that there's a noise going on in the background, it's actually Ruby the dog. So, so we always think about what's right for our own self-care as well. And she's here, as you can hear, she's part of this
conversation. Yeah.
So, Chris, all that was set up, and
Yeah.
I know you wanted to take part in it yourself personally, but there was also another side of that. What was that for you? The testing side of it.
Oh, right. So for me, the pathway was put together. The pilot ran for 2 weeks with victims and survivors that come forward, and it was very, very successful. The feedback was absolutely amazing. So it was then decided to roll it out nationwide. I wanted to test it out in London because the pilot was in Liverpool, and basically I wanted to make sure that what was the blueprint in Liverpool had been transferred to other areas, other locations. And my sister and I went through the Truth Project in 2016, and yeah, it was the same blueprint. I then felt really happy that everybody that chose to come to the Truth session would experience the same kind of quality and care that was given to everybody that went through the pilot. And I again went with someone else in 2018, another survivor. I went as their support, and there was a few little changes that have been made. Like there was a clock in the room that we said there should be no ticking clocks because that can be a trigger for some people. So I immediately took the clock down, put it away. That survivor then felt safe, and I fed that back into the inquiry and said, please make sure you keep going back and looking at all of those little things that won't be a problem for most people, but when you are giving your lived experience of sexual abuse, it matters.
And this is the thing about triggers that we've spoken about before. It can be the minutest thing that triggers one person but doesn't trigger somebody else.
Yeah.
So it was being mindful and open to different possibilities, wasn't it?
Yeah, and every victim survivor that chose to come forward, they were asked specifically, what triggers do you have? What do we need to be mindful of? Because you could even choose your facilitator, so the person that was going to speak to you to take your lived experience, and the person recording it, the assistant facilitator. So if you needed a man, for example, that was provided. If you needed someone of a certain ethnicity, because that is who you wanted, that was provided. So all of these things were catered to. Otherwise, you're not going to give your best lived experience, or you're not going to have the best experience of sharing your truth. And we wanted everybody, as much as possible, to have that valid, positive experience.
But most importantly, when you feel that you're in a safe space, your body enables you to feel safe. It knows what you're going to say, but it's being reassured. So these details that seem minute to people are so important, because it's a physical reaction that can happen when you don't feel safe.
Yeah. So, you know, I know we didn't get it right in every case. I know that. And where people came to me via social media and said this didn't go right for them, I would then ask them, what is it that they felt didn't go right? What was now needed to be done for them to feel like they've been heard and it had been addressed? I then would take that to the inquiry. I would chase the inquiry up for a response, and then I would either feed back to the victim survivor if I was the conduit, or I would set up the link, the relationship between the victim survivor and the person at the inquiry. So I was able to solve some of the issues that went on for some victim survivors, but not everybody. And I know that not everyone was happy, but I also know that there were thousands and thousands of victim survivors who came forward that were so happy with their experience. And I'm proud and pleased that we was able to provide that.
And I'm just going to pick up on that word happy, because I know I've been asked this before.
Yeah.
How can you say happy in this context? But
Mhm.
actually, you know, it is a happy feeling when you have that opportunity to speak the truth, because it doesn't matter how long ago it happened. It plays around and around and around. And to know that somebody has put so much input in and is ready to listen to your experience means so much.
I think when you've been disbelieved as a child, an adolescent, young person, a young adult, to actually be heard by someone in a position of power, and that is what this inquiry was. It was an institution that had power to compel people to answer to what had gone wrong. It gave so many victim survivors their voice heard for the first time. I mean, what was the truth session like for you when you went through it?
Well, this is what's ironic, and again, I'm smiling because there's good and bad with it. You know, for me, it was the opportunity to take part in something where it wasn't just about me, it was about other people. Because sometimes I have had my voice heard occasionally through, I was going to say interrogation, that sounds really hard, but through statements. And that's through the NSPCC, that was also through the police. And it's a very different experience, whereas this was part of a bigger picture, not just me. So I felt I could share with safety in a way, knowing that I'd be heard, but be anonymous. I didn't choose to be anonymous. I did choose for my name to be put forward. But for me going, and I'd even forgotten that I actually went with a friend. And before I walked in, I suddenly became nervous, but my friend gave me the biggest hug ever. And as I got to the door, what was so lovely, there was someone from the Truth Project at the door.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do that dreaded push that door open. They were there with a smile. Something like, how can I help you? I said who I was, and she knew who I was.
Exactly, because they were told, they were trained to do that.
Yeah. Straight away, take a deep breath. Then as we were going upstairs to the different room, is there anything I can get you? You know, just normal, every day. Her tone was lovely. I felt welcome. And it was, you know, here's the ladies. Is there anything I can get you? What can I get you to drink? And then when I went into the actual room, the people that actually taking part, again, asked questions.
Yeah.
They also asked, did they want that lady to stay in? I said, no, it's fine. That was my choice. Sometimes we know, I was saying this earlier, we know how to be strong, but we don't know how to accept assistance sometimes, because that's vulnerability.
Yeah.
Relaying it was, I'm going to say, once it started, it was quite easy in a way. It was like something had been opened up, and I knew I could release. And I even released things that I'd never spoken to about my counsellor as well, and that involved another person. So it wasn't just my dad, which surprised me. Also, as we know, I was in the care system, and so they asked questions as well to clarify different points with regards to the institution that I was in, but in a different way. They're not investigating, you know, emotionlessly, and this is where we want to do a comparison, and that's nothing against the judicial system. It's understanding what the difference is.
Or was.
Yes. So with the Truth Project, nobody put words into your mouth at all, but they did ask clarifying questions in a way that were useful. And even there was one incident, and I can't even remember the question now because obviously it's back there, but I read her body language, and her voice was like, and you're in the children's home and they allowed you to go home. So yes, I had all those adults around me to keep me safe, and they still didn't keep me safe.
Yeah.
And it's only then when you hear, you know, another person's reaction, it's like, oh, that's not normal.
Yeah.
So when I came out and my friend was there, it was huge. Big release of tears, grief, anger, all the different emotions, happiness, relief, And then following that, for me, there was a follow-up with the police, and that was a different scenario, and we'll go into that in a minute. So what about yourself, Chris, going through, not just as a member, because you've been as a member, but going through as a survivor yourself?
I was there more for my sister, really, because I wanted her to have the opportunity to really share what she'd gone through, and be her support on the day. And we sort of shared together, but I sort of handed it over to her, because I felt it was important. I've been part of so many focus groups. I've had my voice heard in so many different ways that I just felt that it was more important that I was there for her. But I was also there judging how the whole session was going, you know, because I wanted to desperately feed back to the other VSCP members exactly what it was like going through it. So I had like a dual hat on. But hearing what my sister had actually gone through in detail for the first time broke my heart. Yeah, that's all I want to say on that, really. But she felt in charge of the whole session. She felt afterwards a deep sense of relief that she was able just to speak her truth, you know. And from that truth session, that led on to our criminal justice case, that we spent 5 years going through the criminal justice system, and completely different experience. Shall I go into that now?
Yes, and one of the things we want to say as well before we go into it is there's a reason why it's very different as well.
Yeah,
because
we want to be fair, don't we?
Absolutely. And we also want people to have the right information so that they can make informed choices. And this is what's always important. So as part of the inquiry, it is important that all facts are stated, but it's not a criminal investigation. When it comes to a criminal investigation, you're looking for proof,
actual proper evidence, tangible evidence. So they want to know dates, times, days, places, names, everything and anything. They want as much factual stuff as they can, because they need to check it out
for prosecution
purposes. Yeah. So if in the truth session, for example, you shared someone's name, you shared how you was being abused, none of that was ever going to be checked out. Your truth was your truth in the Truth Project session. You shared what you wanted, you didn't share what you wanted. But when it comes to a criminal investigation, they have to have the detail, they have to check it out. And if there's witnesses and corroboration, your case is stronger to put before the CPS, and then the CPS will say whether it will go to court or whether no further action gets taken. So as Bev said, the truth session was nothing to do with criminal justice. It was to do with you sharing your lived experience and feeling like you've been heard, not judged, and hopefully
believed.
Yeah, and believe, but hopefully that could be the start of victims and survivors moving on in some small way. Whereas most victims and survivors, they won't even go into the criminal justice system. One, because they haven't got that corroborating evidence. Two, the perpetrator might have died, so there's nothing else you can do anyway, but they still were able to share their lived experiences through the Truth Project. Yes. And they could still name and get rid of what they're holding on to. They could hand it over to someone. Whereas the criminal justice system, as soon as you go, oh, my perpetrator was Mr. X and he died 2 years ago, there's nowhere to go. No. So you're still left with all of that.
Yeah. Also, it's amazing how we often have our experiences, and because we lived them, we accepted them and just move forward. That's the strength that victim survivors have. It happened, you deal with it, you move forward. Even if it's happening regularly, it becomes
your normal.
It becomes your norm. And I remember sharing and I shared about an incident. And when I said, oh, it was only just the once about something, another person, she went, just the once. And then I heard myself.
Yeah.
I realised what I'd said, as in, I tried to minimalise it.
Yeah, we do that, don't we?
And anyone listening,
don't minimalise what you've been through.
Yeah, because it's only when, you know, or when you write it down and you read the language you use, wow. And then when the police did follow up, that other incident was brought up. And I went to say, oh, it's, and I thought, no, actually, how would I like it if I knew that had happened to another child of that age?
Yeah.
That's when, you know, it really brings it home.
And we've said before, haven't we, victim and survivors, we often always hear of someone else's lived experience that was seems so much worse than what we've been through. And it almost makes you feel grateful that you only went through what you went through because this other person's gone through so much. But we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be minimizing what we've been through. Someone definitely may have gone through much worse, but the impact on them is going to be whatever it is on them. And the impact of what we've been through, you've been through, is going to be the impact on you. We shouldn't be comparing, judging, minimizing. It is what it is. It should never have happened. There is, and there is an impact, and that has to be dealt with, because otherwise we're living with all of that negative stuff, like the blame, the shame, the guilt, whatever it is.
Yes, absolutely. So let's going back to the criminal justice system. You still, when you go to make statements, have different rights. And I want to get this point over clearly, because this is undervalued and not actually, people don't realise they have a choice. When you go to the police station and you want to report about sexual abuse, sexual violence, or any abusive act, actually, you still have a choice over some things. You can make requests. I made a request that I wanted to make my statement in a room where there was natural light. And unfortunately, because it was a video statement, I didn't have that choice. But it was explained to me and I accepted that. But you can still ask for a woman officer or a man, or, you know, whatever is right for you, you can ask for. And I want to reiterate that, because I know of a young girl that asked for that and she was told there's no one available. Well, then you're able to say, okay, I'll come back.
Yeah.
I will come back, or I will wait here until you can find someone else. You're not putting anyone else out. You are making sure that you are in the best place to give the best evidence and make your statement.
Our experience of going through the criminal justice system, now, you all know I'm married to a police officer. That's never been a secret. Everyone's known that from day one. So I do think most police officers do a damn good job and they have your best interests at heart. However, even myself, my siblings going through the criminal justice system, we were let down, we were failed so many times. And we had, in my opinion, a poor officer, as in poor service with the first officer, and with the second officer, brilliant, couldn't have done any more, and was so shocked when we got our first no further action that she even was in tears, you know. So the system needs an overhaul, and police officers working with victim and survivors do and should be trauma informed, because of all of the little nuances that we've already explained. You know, if there's not a drink or a toilet or tissues available, for example, that can heighten a victim and survivor who's in distress. It can heighten the response if these things are not available.
But for me as well, and I'm smiling again. So, and I just want to reiterate that, because somebody says, how do you always smile?
Yeah.
Well, it's important. It's part of our life.
Yeah.
But I'm going to smile because body language.
Yeah.
You know, the nuances. If there's somebody in the room who's uncomfortable, boy, can we see it?
Yeah.
If there's someone that doesn't agree, they may say they agree, but their body language doesn't. So they are being trauma informed, very aware of this. And I remember, this wasn't in a police station, but I remember a situation years ago that I have spoken about in different times when I was having counselling.
Yeah.
And he or coaching, I should say, coaching, and it was a man, and he wanted me to learn about meditation. And I asked him, if I'm going to close my eyes, please don't move from your seat.
Yeah.
And I closed my eyes and I started to do the meditation, and he uncrossed his legs and I jumped.
Yeah.
And he said, how did you hear? That's because
Hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance.
Yeah.
So there are all the nuances that we want to be understood in a trauma-informed way of producing a legal statement within the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I could say so much more about the criminal justice system, but not in today's podcast. We'll have to revisit this. So we just wanted to really sort of like show the difference of our experiences going through truth and then our experiences going through the criminal justice system. Now, I do understand that police officers are there to investigate. They are not there to hold our hands when we get triggered and we're in that emotional responsive state, either of anger or complete distraught bereavement. Many of them do not know how to handle that, but if they're trauma informed, they would know how to better respond to that. But a lot of forces now are looking into getting ISVAs, independent sexual violence advisors or advocates, so ISVAs. And what happens is when you go and report to the police, they should be, via the Victims Code of Practice and the victims law that still needs to happen to put those victim codes of practice, our legal rights into a law, they should be saying, okay, when you come and disclose and proceed through the criminal justice system, we're going to allocate you an ISVA. So they will take care of and become the conduit between the victim, survivor and the police. So the police do the investigating,
yes,
and the ISVA does the caring and the nurturing and the go-between.
Which is so important, because I know that whilst the police force were, you know, doing their job and they were very good, and I know how I look after myself, there were times I received a phone call from the police. They wanted to go over some evidence. They put the phone down and there I was left.
Yeah.
And wow, that has a huge impact.
And as victim survivors shared with the inquiry, part of the disclosure to police needs to be trauma informed. If they make an appointment with you, they should keep that appointment, because you've been bent over backwards to make sure you're in a safe space, your children are taken care of, your pets are taken care of, you might have had a day off work, etc., etc. And then when that appointment doesn't happen because of their caseloads, you're then like high and dry and wondering what the hell's going on, feeling ignored, feeling silenced, feeling this, that, and the other. And it's no one's fault, maybe, that they've had to go and deal with something else because that's what they've been told they have to do because of their caseload. So I know, for example, non-recent abuse cases will sit at the bottom of the pile. Whereas if a rape happened right here, right now, today, they would have to go and sort that out over the non-recent. So some non-recent cases get left and left and left because of the cutbacks in the police force, the cutbacks in the criminal justice system. It's on its knees at the moment. We know it's on its knees. So until that sorts all itself out, but this is why this report's important.
Absolutely.
Because victim survivors like you and I have come forward and said, this is where it's broken. This is where I got re-triggered, re-traumatized. This is where I actually left my case. I stopped my case because I couldn't go on any further with it. So they've got all of this learning. They know all of this.
And from my point of view, if I'm really frank and honest, I didn't necessarily want to go through the call on my own. I didn't want to do that. I made that decision with my dad years before he died. However, I'm also very aware that the other person is of an age that could still be out there. But the only information I can give is from a childlike perspective. Even though I'm an eloquent, adult being able to verbalise on behalf of myself now, the information I'm reiterating is from a child's point of view. And that's something that is very difficult for people to understand.
Can you give me an example?
So, for instance, I could say, I was only 7 the first time, but I could only say the name of that person from a child's point of view. So when they were asking for surnames, when they're asking for height,
you didn't know,
when they're asking for actual age, I can't
give any of that detail.
He was older.
Yeah,
I can now, from an adult perspective, and that was in my evidence about what I thought looking back as an adult, but from a child's perspective, which is where I'm giving that evidence, I can't give all of that. I can also, I didn't know his address, but I could describe the building. Now, for me, there was no further action and I was not surprised. However, the one thing I am pleased to know is that is sitting there.
Yeah.
And if anybody else comes forward, you know, or other people, you never know. That's how it gets pulled together. And that's where, sometimes that's where a case comes through. And we know that.
Yeah. So even if you don't want it to go any further because that's your choice, or you haven't got enough evidence for criminal justice purposes, the fact that you've reported it, as Bev said, if someone else comes along and also reports it independently of you, then it builds a picture around that named person. And then the more that evidence comes together, then they can maybe in the future do an investigation. But what I also wanted to say is, if you didn't come forwards and then you subsequently found out that your abuser had gone on to abuse other people, please do not think that it's your fault, that you should have gone and reported, because if you had, you could have saved 1 child, 2 child, 3 child. It's not about that. This is about doing what's right for you. Yeah. And if you didn't want to report, that's your choice.
And also, let's be factual here, and we have to be mindful of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I know from my personal perspective, and we share personally, as we always say, is I never considered other people were being abused.
Because you thought it stopped with you.
I really did.
Yeah.
And then to find out, you know, I only found out 8 years ago about other people that involved my dad. And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
And I took that responsibility on for a while.
Yeah. Please don't do that.
No. So we just wanted to share this side of the IICSA report because it is important. It's important for people who are involved, but also for people who didn't get the opportunity to share their story, to also understand about this report and the involvement in it. So this is part 2. As we said, we will be doing other editions where we'll be going further into the report. And I'm going to be honest here, this is where Chris is going to help me to understand some of the language and meaning, because I get lost in it.
What if you're listening to this, obviously the Truth Project closed in 2021, and you might not want to go to the criminal justice system, but you still want your voice heard. There are lots of organisations like the Survivors Trust, like NAPAC, like Rape Crisis, where you can go and share what's happened to you. So that will be similar, not the same, but it will be similar, like the Truth Project. Okay, so do have a think about what you would like to do, what is right for you in being able to share with someone, or maybe you want to write it down, maybe you want to do some artwork, whatever it is you need to do. Some people write books, some people write blogs. Okay, whatever it is you need to do, have a good think about it. And if you're finding that you're being impacted by the trauma and you need to verbalize it in some way, then think about those organizations that are out there already where you may be able to go and just say, you know what, or ring a hotline, helpline, and just go, right, this has happened for me. Where can I go? What can I do? What are my options? Try that for yourself.
Absolutely. And We're also pleased to note that if you are listening to this and this is your first time of listening to any of our podcasts, we also have an email address, which is breakingthestepforward@gmail.com. If this is your first time of listening to us, thank you. Please look after yourself and go back and listen to some of our other podcasts from the beginning to get some information and reassurance, and you're not alone. For all our other listeners as well, maybe you've not even been through abuse yourself, and if you haven't, we really value the fact that you're taking time to listen to this, understand this, and be aware for somebody else who may open up to you.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys, we're going to need to call this a day on this particular podcast. We hope that you found something helpful today, something that's resonated with you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next podcast.
And it's goodbye from me too.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care.